The woman's bare feet left crimson stains in the white snow as she stumbled forward, each step a prayer that death might wait just a little longer. Penelope Harrington had been walking for 3 days since the stagecoach robbery that killed the driver and left her stranded on the prairie between Kansas settlements. The bandits had taken everything, including her shoes, laughing as they rode off with the strongbox that held her life savings. She had been traveling to Caldwell, Kansas, where a teaching position awaited her at the newly established schoolhouse. Now she wondered if she would ever see another sunrise. The December wind howled across the plains, cutting through her thin wool dress like a blade. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, and her feet no longer hurt, which frightened her more than the pain had. She knew what that meant. She had read about frostbite in her medical books back in Philadelphia, before her father's death had left her penniless and forced her westward in search of work. Through the blinding snow, she thought she saw movement. A rider, perhaps, or just another cruel trick of her failing vision. Penelope tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Her legs finally gave out beneath her, and she collapsed face first into the snow. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was the sound of horse hooves thundering closer and a deep voice calling out in alarm. When consciousness returned, warmth surrounded her. Not the warmth of heaven as she had expected, but something earthly and solid. Strong arms held her against a broad chest, and she could hear the steady rhythm of a heartbeat beneath her ear. She managed to open her eyes and found herself looking up at the most striking face she had ever seen. The man carrying her had dark hair that fell past his collar, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. He looked down at her, and relief flooded his features. "Thank God," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I lost you there for a minute." Penelope tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too violently. She realized she was wrapped in a heavy coat that smelled of leather and wood smoke, and her feet, those poor frozen feet, were now encased in something warm and soft. "Your boots," she managed to whisper, looking down at the man's stocking feet as he carried her through the snow. "Not important right now," he said firmly. "There's a lined shack about a quarter-mile ahead. We need to get you inside and warmed up properly." She wanted to protest, to tell him he would freeze without his boots, but the effort of speaking seemed too great. Instead, she let herself rest against him, feeling safer than she had in months, perhaps years. The man moved quickly despite carrying her weight and walking in just his socks. She could feel the tension in his arms, the determination in his stride. Whoever this stranger was, he had decided she was worth saving, and he would not be deterred. True to his word, a small wooden structure emerged from the swirling snow. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her gently on a rough cot in the corner. The shack was barely furnished, just a place for ranch hands to shelter during storms, but right now it looked like a palace to Penelope. The man worked with efficient urgency, building a fire in the small stove, filling a pot with snow to melt for water, and wrapping additional blankets around her shivering form. Only when the fire was roaring and warmth began to seep into the small space did he finally sit down and look at his own feet. His socks were soaked through and already stiffening with ice. Penelope watched with growing concern as he peeled them off, revealing feet that were dangerously pale. "You fool," she said, her voice stronger now. "You will lose your toes for a stranger." He looked up at her and smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his rugged face into something almost boyish. "Well, I reckon I can spare a few toes." Cannot say the same for a lady who was already at death's door when I found her. "Still," Penelope insisted, struggling to sit up. "That was a terrible risk." "Name's Benjamin Preston," he said, extending a hand toward her, "but folks call me Ben, and I do not consider saving a life a risk, madam. I consider it the only choice a decent person can make." She took his hand, noting the calluses and strength in his grip. "Penelope Harrington. I was traveling to Caldwell for a teaching position when our stage was robbed." Ben's expression darkened. "The Dalton gang has been terrorizing this territory for months. You are lucky to be alive. Most folks do not walk away from their robberies." "The driver did not," Penelope said quietly, remembering the sound of the gunshot, the way the man had slumped forward in his seat. "I am sorry," Ben said, and she could tell he meant it. He moved to the stove, checking the melting snow. "We need to warm you up slowly. Too fast and it will do more harm than good. I have done some cattle drives through winter storms, seen what cold can do to a person." As the water heated, Ben found some old rags and began carefully cleaning the cuts on her feet. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such a large man, and Penelope found herself studying him more closely. He wore typical cowboy attire under the coat she still had wrapped around her, denim pants and a flannel shirt, both well worn but clean. A gun belt hung on a peg by the door, and she noticed he had positioned himself between her and the entrance, even in this small space. A protector by nature, she realized. "How long have you been ranching in Kansas?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the stinging pain as he worked on her feet, partly because she genuinely wanted to know more about this man who had given up his boots to save her. "Going on 5 years now," Ben replied, his attention focused on her injuries. "I came out from Missouri after the war, worked as a hired hand for a few years before I saved enough to buy my own small spread. Nothing fancy, just 160 acres south of Caldwell, but it is mine. Built the house myself, rounded up wild cattle from the brush country down in Texas, branded them with my mark. The double P for Preston's pride." There was something in his voice when he spoke of his ranch, a warmth and satisfaction that told Penelope everything she needed to know about his character. This was a man who valued honest work and independence, who had built something with his own 2 hands. "That sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. "I have only ever lived in cities. Philadelphia was so crowded, so dirty. When the teaching board wrote to say they wanted someone educated to come west and teach the children of Caldwell, it seemed like Providence. A new start, fresh air, open spaces." "It is all that and more," Ben agreed, finally satisfied with his work on her feet. He wrapped them carefully in clean cloth torn from an old shirt he found in the shack. "But it is also hard, sometimes brutal. The winters are bitter, the summers scorching. People have to be tough to survive out here." "I am tougher than I look," Penelope said with more confidence than she felt. Ben glanced up at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. It was not pity she saw there, but respect, admiration even. "I believe you are, Miss Harrington. Anyone who survived 3 days in this storm has strength most folks will never know." He poured the warm water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink this slowly. Your body needs to warm from the inside, too." Penelope wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. The water tasted of metal and smoke, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever consumed. She sipped carefully, watching Ben tend to his own feet with much less care than he had shown hers. "Let me help," she offered, setting down her cup. "No need, madam. I will be fine. Ben Preston, you gave me your boots in a blizzard. The least I can do is ensure you keep your toes. Now sit down properly and let me see." Perhaps it was the schoolteacher tone she used, or perhaps he was simply too tired to argue, but Ben obeyed. He sat on the floor near the stove, and Penelope, moving slowly because her body still ached everywhere, knelt beside him. His feet were in better condition than hers had been, but they were still dangerously cold. She worked with the same careful attention he had shown her, warming them gradually, massaging circulation back into the tissue. It was an oddly intimate act, kneeling before this stranger and tending to him, but it felt right somehow. "You have done this before," Ben observed. "My father was a physician," Penelope explained. "I often assisted him with patients." He believed women were just as capable of learning medicine as men, which was a controversial opinion in Philadelphia society. "He taught me everything he could before he died last spring." "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you. He was a good man, one of the best. He left debts, unfortunately." Medical men who treat the poor often die poor themselves. "I sold everything we owned to settle his accounts, but it left me with nothing. A friend told me about the teaching positions opening in the Western Territories, and it seemed like the only option." Ben was quiet for a moment, then said, "Takes courage to leave everything you know and travel halfway across the country alone." "Or desperation," Penelope said with a wry smile. "I reckon there is not much difference between the two sometimes. Courage is just desperation pointed in a useful direction." Penelope found herself laughing, a real laugh that surprised her. When had she last felt light enough to laugh? "That is quite philosophical for a cowboy." "Cowboys have plenty of time for thinking," Ben said, and she heard the smile in his voice. "Long days on the range with nothing but cattle and sky for company. A man's mind can wander pretty far in that kind of quiet." The storm continued to rage outside, wind howling around the small shack. But inside, warmed by the fire and the unexpected companionship, Penelope felt a peace she had not known in months. She finished tending to Ben's feet and sat back, suddenly aware of how improper this entire situation was. Here she was, alone with a strange man in a remote cabin, and yet she felt no fear, no concern for her reputation. Perhaps nearly dying had put such social concerns in perspective. "The storm should blow itself out by morning," Ben said, as if reading her thoughts. "I will get you to Caldwell safely, Miss Harrington. You have my word on that." "I believe you," she said simply, because she did. They passed the evening in conversation, sharing stories of their lives as the fire crackled and the storm battered the walls. Ben told her about life on his ranch, the hard work of building something from nothing, the satisfaction of watching his small herd grow each year. He spoke of the land with genuine love, describing sunrises over the prairie that painted the grass gold, the way the wind moved through the wheat fields like waves on an ocean. Penelope shared memories of Philadelphia, the cobblestone streets and gas lamps, the libraries and concert halls. She told him about her father's medical practice, how they had lived modestly but happily in rooms above a bakery, the smell of fresh bread greeting them each morning. She described her love of teaching, how she had tutored children from the neighborhood, and discovered her passion for helping young minds grow and learn. As the night deepened, their conversation turned more personal. Ben admitted that loneliness was the hardest part of ranch life, that he sometimes went weeks without seeing another soul. Penelope confessed her fear that she would be rejected in Caldwell, that they would take one look at her city manners and refined speech, and decide she did not belong. "You belong wherever you decide you belong," Ben said firmly. "And any town would be lucky to have someone with your education and compassion teaching their children." His words warmed her more than the fire. When had anyone last spoken to her with such confidence in her abilities? Her father had believed in her, but he had been gone for months now, and she had begun to doubt herself. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. Ben insisted Penelope take the cot while he made a bedroll on the floor near the fire. She protested, but he would not budge. "You have been through an ordeal, Miss Harrington. You need proper rest. Besides, I have slept on hard ground more nights than I can count. This floor is downright comfortable compared to some places I have bedded down." Too tired to argue further, Penelope settled onto the cot, wrapped in Ben's coat and the rough blankets. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Ben adding wood to the fire, felt his presence watching over her like a guardian. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt truly safe. Morning came with startling brightness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine, the harsh prairie landscape softened into something almost magical. Ben was already awake when Penelope opened her eyes, and he had somehow produced coffee and hardtack for breakfast. "Not exactly a fancy hotel breakfast," he apologized, handing her a steaming tin cup. "It is perfect," she assured him, and meant it. After they ate, Ben assessed their situation. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding he called Duke, had weathered the storm in a lean-to behind the shack. The animal seemed no worse for wear, greeting Ben with an affectionate nicker. "Caldwell is about 15 miles southeast," Ben said, studying the sun's position. "We can make it by afternoon if we start now. You will ride Duke, and I will walk alongside." "Absolutely not," Penelope protested. "You are still wearing my boots, and you cannot possibly walk 15 miles in the snow." Ben looked down at the boots on his feet, the ones he had given her yesterday, then back up with a sheepish expression. "Forgot I was wearing them. Got so used to the fit already." "They fit you well enough. Your feet are not exactly tiny, Miss Harrington." She should have been offended, but instead she laughed. "City living requires a lot of walking. I suppose my feet grew accordingly." They settled on a compromise. They would both ride Duke, with Penelope sitting in front of Ben in the saddle. It was terribly improper, but propriety seemed less important than practicality out here on the frontier. The journey to Caldwell was slow but pleasant. Duke was sure-footed despite the snow, and Ben proved to be an excellent guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the territory. He showed her where a creek ran in summer, now frozen solid. He pointed out the distant line that marked his property boundary, a swell of pride in his voice. He warned her about the draws and gullies that could hide dangers, the places where cattle liked to shelter, the old buffalo wallows that still marked the landscape, even though the great herds were gone. Penelope found herself relaxing against Ben's chest as they rode, his arms steady on either side of her as he held the reins. She could feel his warmth through the layers of clothing, hear his deep voice rumbling behind her as he spoke. It was strange how comfortable she felt with this man. She had known less than 24 hours. Perhaps the shared intimacy of survival had bonded them in ways that normal social interaction never could. "Tell me about Caldwell," she said as they crested a hill and began the descent into a wide valley. "It is a cattle town born from the Kishome Trail trade," Ben explained. "Not even 10 years old yet, but growing fast. There is a main street with businesses, a church, a school building that was just completed last fall. Maybe 500 people living there now, more during the cattle season when the drovers come through. It can get rough when the cowboys are in town with money burning holes in their pockets, but mostly it is a decent place full of decent people trying to build something lasting. And they want a real teacher. They need one desperately. The woman who was teaching before, Mrs. Morrison, she did her best, but she only had a 6th-grade education herself. The town council voted to hire someone with proper credentials, someone who could prepare the children for more than just ranch work. That is why they reached out east. "No pressure then," Penelope said wryly. She felt Ben's chest move with silent laughter. "You will do fine, Miss Harrington. Better than fine." As they drew closer to town, Penelope's nervousness grew. What would people think when she arrived on horseback with a cowboy, wearing his coat and boots, her dress torn and dirty? The school board was expecting a proper Philadelphia lady, not this bedraggled creature. As if sensing her worry, Ben said quietly, "Hold your head high. You survived something that would have killed most people. That commands respect out here, no matter what you are wearing." His words steadied her. He was right. She had survived bandits and a blizzard. She could certainly handle meeting the good people of Caldwell, Kansas. The town appeared on the horizon just as the afternoon sun began its descent. From a distance, it looked like a collection of wooden buildings huddled together on the prairie, smoke rising from chimneys into the clear winter air. As they got closer, Penelope could make out more details. A wide main street, several side streets branching off, buildings in various states of construction. It was rough and new, nothing like the established elegance of Philadelphia, but there was something hopeful about it, something vital and alive. People stopped what they were doing as Ben guided Duke down the main street. Penelope felt their stares, heard the whispers that followed in their wake. She kept her spine straight, her chin up, just as Ben had advised. Ben stopped Duke in front of a neat white building with a bell tower. The school, Penelope realized. Her school now if they still wanted her after seeing her current state. A woman emerged from the building, middle-aged and competent, looking in a practical wool dress and apron. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight of Penelope and Ben. "Lord have mercy," the woman said, hurrying forward. "Is this Miss Harrington from Philadelphia?" "Yes, madam," Ben said, dismounting and then helping Penelope down with careful hands. "Found her walking barefoot in the snow about 15 miles north of here. Stage was robbed, driver killed. She has been through quite an ordeal." The woman's expression shifted from shock to concern to determination. "I am Martha Dennison, head of the school board. Miss Harrington, you poor dear, come inside at once. We need to get you warmed up and fed properly." More people were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. A tall man in a suit approached, his face grave. "Benjamin Preston, did you say the stage was robbed?" "Yes, sir, Mayor Keller. The Dalton gang, most likely. Miss Harrington was the only survivor." A murmur ran through the growing crowd. The mayor's expression hardened. "We will need to inform the marshal. This has gone on long enough. Those bandits need to be brought to justice." But Penelope was not listening to the mayor. Her attention was fixed on Ben, who was preparing to leave. The thought of him riding away sent an unexpected pang through her chest. "Wait," she said, reaching out to grasp his arm. "Your coat, your boots. I need to return them." Ben looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, and something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of what they had shared in that storm. "Keep the coat for now, Miss Harrington. You need it more than I do. As for the boots, well, I reckon we are about the same size. I have others at the ranch. But I do not even know how to thank you properly. You saved my life." "No thanks needed. I am just glad I found you when I did." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture so quintessentially Western that it made her heart ache. "I am sure I will see you around town, Miss Harrington. Caldwell is not that big a place." Then he was mounting Duke and turning the horse back toward the street, and Penelope felt Martha Dennison's gentle but firm hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the school building. "Come along, dear. We have a room prepared for you above the school. It is not fancy, but it is warm and clean. Let us get you settled." Penelope let herself be led inside, but she looked back over her shoulder, watching Ben ride away down the street. He did not look back, and she told herself that was for the best. He had his life, his ranch to run. She had her teaching position to start. Their paths had crossed in a moment of crisis, but now they would diverge again. That was how life worked. Still, as Martha showed her the modest but comfortable rooms that would be her home, as other women from town arrived with offerings of food and clothing, as everyone fussed over her and exclaimed about her miraculous survival, Penelope found her thoughts returning again and again to Ben Preston, to his steady hands and kind eyes, to the way he had given her his boots without hesitation, willing to risk his own safety for a stranger, to the sound of his voice in the darkness, keeping her tethered to life when she had been ready to surrender. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Penelope met with the school board, who were thrilled to finally have their trained teacher despite her dramatic arrival. She was introduced to the families whose children she would be teaching, 23 students ranging in age from 5 to 14. She received donated clothes from the charitable ladies of Caldwell, plain but serviceable dresses that would suit her new life much better than the ruined silk traveling dress she had been wearing. Everyone wanted to hear the story of her survival, and she told it until the words felt rehearsed. But she always downplayed Ben's role, giving him credit for saving her but not dwelling on the details of their night in the line shack, the intimacy of caring for each other's injuries, the long conversation that had revealed so much about both of them. Some things felt too personal to share. She kept his coat, though. It hung on a peg by her door, and sometimes in the evening when she was alone, she would hold it and breathe in the scent of leather and wood smoke, remembering. The school opened on a Monday morning in early January, and Penelope discovered that she loved teaching even more than she had expected. The children were eager and bright, hungry for knowledge in a way that city children, jaded by easy access to education, rarely were. She taught them reading and arithmetic, geography and history, but also practical things their parents requested: how to write letters, how to keep accounts, how to read contracts so they would not be cheated. January gave way to February, and winter maintained its grip on the prairie. Penelope settled into a routine, finding a rhythm to her new life. She attended church on Sundays, where she was welcomed warmly. She joined the ladies' sewing circle, where she learned the local gossip and began to understand the social dynamics of her new home. She took her meals at the boarding house run by Mrs. Chen, a widow who cooked excellent food and asked no prying questions. But she did not see Ben. She looked for him every time she walked down the main street, scanned the congregation at church, asked casual questions about local ranchers. Martha Dennison mentioned that the Preston ranch was far enough out that Ben rarely came to town except for supplies, maybe once a month if the weather was good. Penelope told herself it was better this way. She was building a new life, establishing herself in the community. She did not need complications, but she dreamed about him sometimes, dreams where she was back in the snow and he was riding to save her. Dreams where they talked by firelight, dreams where his hands gently tended her frozen feet. Late in February, a warm spell melted much of the snow and turned the streets to mud. Penelope was dismissing her students for the day, reminding them to practice their spelling words, when one of the older boys, Tommy Garrett, approached her desk with his hat in his hands. "Excuse me, Miss Harrington," he said shyly. "My pa wanted me to invite you to dinner tomorrow night. He says it is time we showed proper hospitality to our teacher." Penelope smiled at the boy. James Garrett was a prosperous rancher who had been one of the first settlers in the area. His wife had died several years ago, and he was raising Tommy and his younger daughter Sarah alone. Both children were excellent students. "That is very kind of your father. Please tell him I would be delighted to accept." The next evening, James Garrett picked her up in a smart buggy, and they drove out to his ranch, a sprawling operation with a large house and multiple outbuildings. Sarah greeted them at the door, excited to show Miss Harrington her room and her collection of dolls. Tommy proudly displayed the new calf he was raising himself. Dinner was pleasant, the food hearty and well prepared. James proved to be an interesting conversationalist, educated beyond what Penelope had expected. He had been a lawyer in Illinois before coming west, he explained, but had found he preferred ranching to practicing law. "There is something honest about working the land," he said as they sat in his comfortable parlor after dinner. "The cattle do not lie. The weather does not play political games. You put in the work and the land gives back." Penelope could see why he had been successful. He was intelligent and ambitious, respected in the community. He was also handsome in a refined way, his dark hair showing only a few threads of silver, his manner polished and courteous. As the evening drew to a close and James drove her back to town, he said carefully, "I hope you will not think me forward, Miss Harrington, but I have enjoyed your company very much. Would you allow me to call on you again?" Penelope hesitated. She should say yes. James Garrett was exactly the kind of man she should be interested in. Stable, successful, educated, a widower in need of a mother for his children. There was no rational reason to refuse. "I would be happy to receive you," she heard herself say, and James smiled with genuine pleasure. Word spread quickly in Caldwell that the teacher and the prosperous rancher were courting. Martha Dennison congratulated Penelope warmly, saying what a fine match it would be. The other ladies in the sewing circle agreed that James had been alone long enough, and Miss Harrington would make an excellent stepmother for those dear children. Penelope let herself be carried along by the community's approval. James called on her twice a week, always proper and respectful. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry, a silk scarf ordered from Kansas City, hothouse flowers that must have cost a fortune. He took her for buggy rides on pleasant afternoons, attended church with her, included her in family dinners at his ranch. She tried to feel more than she did. James was kind and attentive. His children adored her. He represented security and status in her new community. But when he kissed her hand in farewell, she felt nothing but mild warmth. No racing heart, no breathless anticipation. None of the things the romantic novels she had secretly read as a girl had promised. March arrived with the promise of spring. The prairie began to turn green, and wildflowers dotted the landscape. Penelope's students were progressing wonderfully, and she felt proud of what she was accomplishing. James Garrett was growing more serious in his attentions, and she suspected he might propose soon. She should be happy. She was building exactly the kind of respectable life she had hoped for when she left Philadelphia. So why did she still dream about a cowboy who had given her his boots? The answer came on a Saturday afternoon, when she was shopping for supplies at Mitchell's General Store. She was examining a bolt of cloth, considering whether she could afford to make a new dress, when the bell above the door chimed and she looked up. Ben Preston stood in the doorway, hat in hand, and Penelope's heart stopped. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face weathered by wind and sun, but his eyes were the same storm gray she had memorized in the firelight. Those eyes widened when they landed on her, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Ben was crossing the store in 3 long strides, stopping just in front of her, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of leather and wood smoke. "Miss Harrington," he said, his voice rough as if he had not spoken in days. "I heard you were doing well, that you had settled in fine." "I have," she managed. "The teaching position is everything I hoped for. The town has been very welcoming." "Good, that is good." He seemed to struggle for words. I wanted to come check on you sooner, but I thought it was best to let you find your feet without complications. And then I heard about you and James Garrett, and I figured I had waited too long anyway." Penelope felt her cheeks flush. "James has been very kind. He is a good man. Solid." "You could do a lot worse." Ben's jaw tightened. "I just wanted to see for myself that you were all right, that you had recovered from your ordeal. Thanks to you, I am perfectly fine." They stood in awkward silence, the weight of unspoken things hanging between them. Other customers were starting to stare, including Mrs. Taylor, the biggest gossip in Caldwell. "Well," Ben said finally, settling his hat back on his head, "I will let you get back to your shopping. I just needed to know you were all right." He turned to leave, and Penelope felt panic rising in her chest. This could not be how it ended, with polite pleasantries in a store while busybodies watched. "Ben, wait." The words came out before she could stop them. He turned back, hope flickering across his face. "I still have your coat. At the school, I should return it to you." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it, but Ben nodded seriously. "I suppose I should retrieve it. Winter is not quite over yet." "I could walk back now," Penelope offered, "if you have time." "I have time," Ben said simply. They walked side by side down the muddy Main Street, aware of eyes following them, aware of how this would fuel the gossip mill. Penelope did not care. For the first time in weeks, she felt fully awake, fully alive. Once they reached the school and climbed the stairs to her rooms, the propriety of the situation hit her. She was inviting a man into her private quarters, something she would never have considered in Philadelphia. But this was Ben, and somehow normal rules did not seem to apply. She retrieved the coat from its peg and handed it to him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent electricity through her whole body. "Thank you for taking such good care of it," Ben said, making no move to leave. "Thank you for saving my life," Penelope replied. "I never properly thanked you, Ben. You risked everything for a stranger." "You were never a stranger," he said softly. "Not from the moment I saw you in that snow. I felt like I had been searching for you my whole life and just did not know it until I found you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "Then why did you stay away?" she whispered. "Because you deserve better than a dirt-poor cowboy with more ambition than sense. Because James Garrett can give you comfort and security and a fine house. Because I had no right to complicate your new life with my feelings." "What about my feelings?" Penelope asked, her voice gaining strength. "Does no one think to ask what I want?" Ben's expression shifted to something she could not read. "What do you want, Penelope?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her brave. "I want to feel the way I felt in that lined shack. Safe and understood and seen for who I really am. I want conversation that challenges me and silence that comforts me. I want to build something real with someone who values me as a partner, not just a pretty addition to his household or a mother for his children." She took a step closer to him. "I want my heart to race when someone walks into a room, and it only does that for one person, Ben. It only does that for you." For a moment, Ben just stared at her, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then his arms were around her, and he was kissing her with a desperation that matched her own. His lips were warm and firm, and Penelope felt like she had finally come home after a long journey. She wound her arms around his neck, kissing him back with all the longing she had been suppressing for 2 months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "I have thought about you every single day," he said quietly. "I tried to stay away because I thought it was the right thing to do, the honorable thing, but I was miserable, Penelope. My ranch was not enough anymore. Nothing was enough without you. I tried to care for James the way a woman should care for a man she might marry, Penelope confessed. "He is everything that makes sense, but sense has nothing to do with what I feel for you. What about your reputation?" "The school board. If we court, people will talk. They will say you are throwing away a good match for a cowboy with 160 acres and a half-built house." "Let them talk," Penelope said firmly. "I did not come all the way to Kansas to live by Philadelphia society's rules. I came here for a new life, and that means I get to choose what kind of life I want." Ben pulled her close again, and she felt him smile against her hair. "You are remarkable, do you know that?" "I am beginning to suspect it," she said, feeling lighter than she had in years. They spent the afternoon talking, sitting side by side on her small sofa, hands clasped together. Ben told her about the long winter alone on his ranch, how he had thrown himself into work to avoid thinking about her. He had built a new barn, expanded his herd, repaired every fence on his property. But at night, lying alone in his small house, he had thought only of her. Penelope shared her experience settling into Caldwell, her love for teaching, her growing realization that James Garrett's attentions, while flattering, felt wrong. She described her confusion and guilt over not being able to return his feelings, her fear that something was wrong with her. "Nothing is wrong with you," Ben said fiercely. "You cannot force your heart to feel what it does not. Believe me, I tried with other women before you. There was a rancher's daughter 2 years back who made it clear she was interested. Pretty girl, good family, made perfect sense. But I felt nothing beyond friendship, and it would have been cruel to pretend otherwise." As the afternoon faded toward evening, reality intruded. Ben would need to head back to his ranch soon, and Penelope would need to figure out how to end things with James Garrett as kindly as possible. "This is going to cause talk," Ben said, worry creasing his forehead. "I do not want to damage your standing in the community." "Then we do this properly," Penelope decided. "I will speak to James tomorrow, be honest with him. He deserves that much. The school board may have opinions, but I have not violated my teaching contract. I am allowed to court whomever I choose." "And you choose me?" Ben asked, as if he still could not quite believe it. "I choose you," Penelope confirmed. "I chose you the moment you gave me your boots, Ben Preston. I just did not realize it yet." He kissed her again, softer this time, tender and full of promise. When he finally left, riding Duke back toward his ranch in the gathering twilight, Penelope stood at her window and watched until he disappeared from view. The next day, she asked James Garrett if she could speak with him privately. They sat in the parlor of the boarding house with Mrs. Chen acting as an unofficial chaperone in the next room. "James, you have been nothing but kind to me," Penelope began, her hands folded in her lap. "You and your children have welcomed me with genuine warmth, and I will always be grateful for that." James's expression grew guarded. He was an intelligent man. He could sense what was coming. "However, I cannot in good conscience continue accepting your attentions when my heart belongs to another. It would be unfair to you and to your children to allow you to develop expectations I cannot fulfill." "Ben Preston," James said flatly. It was not a question. Penelope did not deny it. "Yes." James was quiet for a long moment, and Penelope held her breath, hoping he would not be cruel. Finally, he sighed. "I cannot say I am not disappointed, Penelope. I had hoped that we might build something together, but I do not want a wife who wishes she was elsewhere. I experienced that once before with my first wife. She never adjusted to ranch life, never stopped longing for the city. It made us both miserable." "I am so sorry, James." "You deserve someone who can love you the way you should be loved." "As do you," he said, his voice gentler. He stood and offered his hand. "I hope we can remain friends for the sake of the children, if nothing else. They have grown very fond of you as a teacher." Penelope shook his hand, relieved that he was being so gracious. Of course, nothing need change regarding my relationship with Tommy and Sarah. After James left, Penelope felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had been honest and kind, and while she knew people would gossip, she had acted with integrity. The gossip came swiftly and enthusiastically. Mrs. Taylor made sure everyone knew that Miss Harrington had thrown over the respectable James Garrett for a cowboy who barely had a pot to piss in. The ladies' sewing circle buzzed with speculation and thinly veiled criticism. Even Martha Dennison, usually so supportive, expressed concern. "Are you certain about this, dear?" she asked when Penelope arrived for the next school board meeting. "James Garrett is established, respected. Benjamin Preston is a good man, but he is only just starting out. Life on a small ranch is hard, Penelope. Much harder than teaching in town." "I appreciate your concern, Martha," Penelope said calmly, "but I am quite certain. Ben and I understand each other in a way that cannot be explained by logic or common sense. Sometimes the heart knows things the mind cannot comprehend." To her relief, the school board did not make an issue of her romantic choices. As long as she continued to teach effectively and conduct herself with appropriate decorum, her personal life was her own business. Not everyone was pleased, but no one could claim she was violating any actual rules. Ben came to town the following Saturday to call on her properly. He had cleaned up, shaved, and wore clothes Penelope suspected he only brought out for church. He looked uncomfortable in the formal attire, like a wild thing trying to fit into a cage, but he was making the effort for her. They walked together through town, fully aware that they were performing for an audience. Ben kept a respectful distance, did not take her arm without permission, and acted the perfect gentleman. But when their eyes met, the heat between them could have set the prairie on fire. "This is torture," he muttered under his breath as they passed another group of watching townspeople. "I want to actually talk to you, not parade around like we are on stage." "Next time you can show me your ranch," Penelope suggested. "We will have more privacy there." "You want to see the ranch?" Ben sounded pleased and nervous at the same time. "It is nothing fancy, Penelope, I mean it. The house is barely more than a cabin. I do not have much in the way of furniture or nice things." "I do not care about nice things," Penelope assured him. "I want to see the place you love, the life you have built. That matters more than fancy furniture." The following Sunday, after church services, Ben arrived with a wagon instead of on horseback. He had brought blankets and a picnic basket, making the journey to his ranch into a proper outing. The ride took nearly 2 hours, but Penelope enjoyed every moment. The spring prairie was beautiful, covered in wildflowers and new grass. Ben pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the land, his love for this wild country evident in every word. When his ranch came into view, Penelope understood immediately why he had downplayed it. The house was indeed small, just 3 rooms from what she could see, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The barn was newer and larger, built with care and precision. Fences stretched across rolling pasture land where cattle grazed peacefully. "It is not much," Ben said, tension in his voice. "It is wonderful," Penelope said honestly. "You built this yourself, Ben. You created something from nothing. How could I be anything but impressed?" The relief on his face made her heart ache. How long had he been worried that she would reject him because his holdings were modest? He helped her down from the wagon and showed her around with growing enthusiasm. The barn was his pride and joy, built to withstand the harsh prairie weather. He showed her his small but healthy herd, explaining his plans to expand gradually over the coming years. He pointed out where he wanted to dig a proper well, where he hoped to plant an orchard if he could get the trees to survive. "And the house," he said, opening the door with obvious hesitation. Like I said, it is not much. The interior was indeed sparse. A main room with a stone fireplace, a bedroom barely big enough for a bed, and a small lean-to kitchen. But it was clean and well-maintained, the furniture rough but sturdy and handmade. You built all of this? Penelope asked, running her hand over a table that showed careful craftsmanship. Had to. Could not afford to buy much when I started out. I am a fair hand with woodworking, taught myself from a book I bought in Wichita. Penelope could see the potential everywhere she looked. The house needed a woman's touch, curtains and rugs and the small comforts that made a structure into a home. But the bones were solid, built with care and attention to detail. I know it is not what you are used to, Ben said quietly. Not like James Garrett's fine house or your father's home in Philadelphia. Penelope turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. Ben Preston, I do not need a fine house. I need a home, and a home is about the people in it, not the size of the rooms or the quality of the furniture. This place has heart. You built it with your own hands, poured your dreams into every board and nail. That makes it more valuable than any mansion. Ben pulled her close, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to his steady heartbeat. This felt right in a way nothing else had since leaving Philadelphia. Not the teaching position, despite how much she loved it. Not the approval of the town ladies or the attention of James Garrett. This, Ben's arms around her in the house he had built, this was where she belonged. They spent the afternoon at the ranch, eating the picnic lunch Ben had prepared and talking about everything and nothing. Penelope shared her dreams of maybe opening a small library in Caldwell, of teaching not just children but adults who wanted to learn. Ben talked about his plans to improve the ranch, to maybe try breeding horses in addition to cattle, to someday have enough success to hire a hand or two. I want to build something that lasts, he said as they sat on the porch steps, watching the sun begin its descent. Not just for me, but for my children someday. I want them to have opportunities I never had growing up. Tell me about your childhood, Penelope requested. He had shared little about his past, and she wanted to understand all of him. Ben was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. I grew up in Missouri on a farm that barely produced enough to keep us fed. My father was a hard man, bitter about his failures. He drank too much and worked us too hard. I had 3 sisters and a brother. My brother died in the war fighting for the Union. My sisters married young to escape, and I do not blame them. And you came west, Penelope prompted gently. Soon as I turned 18, I left. Told myself I would make something of my life, that I would not end up drunk and angry like my father. Worked as a hired hand, saved every penny I could, and bought this land 5 years ago. It is not much, but it is mine, bought and paid for. No one can take it away from me. Penelope understood then the driving force behind Ben's determination. He had grown up with nothing, had seen what poverty and bitterness could do to a man, and he was fighting with everything he had to build a different life. You have already succeeded, she told him. You are nothing like your father. You are kind and hardworking and honest. You have built something to be proud of. I want to be able to support a wife properly, Ben said, looking directly at her. I am not there yet, Penelope. I can barely support myself some years, but I am working toward it. Give me a year, maybe 2, and I can offer you the kind of life you deserve. What if I do not want to wait a year or 2? Penelope asked, her heart racing. Ben turned to stare at her. What do you mean? I mean I have a steady income from teaching. It is not a fortune, but it is reliable. Together, we could manage quite well. You could focus on building the ranch, and I could continue teaching. Many married women teach out here. It is not like back east where it is forbidden. Penelope Harrington, are you proposing to me? Ben asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. She felt her cheeks flush but met his gaze steadily. I suppose I am, unless you want to make it official and ask me properly. Ben dropped to one knee right there on the porch step, taking her hand in both of his. His eyes were serious now, intense with emotion. Penelope Harrington, from the moment I saw you walking in that snow, I knew you were special. You are the bravest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever met. I do not have much to offer you except a small ranch, a half-built house, and a heart that is completely yours. But I swear I will spend every day of my life making you happy, making you feel loved and valued and cherished. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Penelope said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely yes. Ben surged to his feet and kissed her deeply, and Penelope felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This was what she had been searching for without even knowing it. A partner who saw her as an equal, who valued her strength as much as her softness, who wanted to build a life with her, not just find someone to fill a role. They set the wedding for late May, wanting to give the town time to adjust to the idea and to allow Penelope to finish the spring term of school without distraction. Martha Dennison, despite her initial reservations, threw herself into helping plan the ceremony. Even the ladies' sewing circle came around, won over by Ben's obvious devotion and Penelope's unmistakable happiness. James Garrett wished them well with genuine grace, proving himself to be the good man everyone said he was. His children were disappointed that Miss Harrington would not become their stepmother, but they still adored her as a teacher. The wedding took place in the small white church on a beautiful spring morning. Penelope wore a simple dress made by the ladies of the sewing circle, white cotton with lace trim, nothing fancy but perfectly suited to a frontier wedding. She carried wildflowers that Ben had picked himself from the prairie that morning. Ben wore his best suit and looked both uncomfortable and heartbreakingly handsome. When Penelope walked down the aisle toward him, his face transformed with such joy that there was not a dry eye in the church. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, prosperity and hardship, for as long as they both lived. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ben kissed her with such tenderness that Penelope felt her knees go weak. The whole town turned out for the celebration that followed. Tables were set up in the churchyard, laden with food that people had brought to share. There was fiddle music and dancing, laughter and congratulations. Even Mrs. Taylor, who had been the harshest critic of their courtship, admitted that they made a handsome couple. As the sun began to set, Ben and Penelope climbed into the wagon for the journey to the ranch. Their ranch now, Penelope thought with a thrill of excitement. Their home. The ride was quiet, both of them tired but happy. When they arrived at the house, Ben insisted on carrying Penelope over the threshold, a tradition he said he would not ignore even if it made them both laugh. Inside, Penelope discovered that Ben had been working secretly to improve the house. New curtains hung in the windows, made from fabric he had bought on one of his trips to town. A proper bed frame filled the bedroom, replacing the rope bed he had been using. Wildflowers in mason jars decorated the table. "Ben," she breathed, turning to look at him with tears in her eyes. "When did you do all this?" "I have been coming in at night after working the ranch," he admitted. "I wanted our wedding night to be special, wanted you to feel like this was truly your home." Penelope kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "This is my home because you are here. That is all I need." They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of two people who had found something rare and precious. Afterward, lying in Ben's arms with the prairie wind whispering outside, Penelope reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. The robbery that had seemed like a tragedy had actually been a gift, stranding her in the snow where Ben could find her, giving them the chance to know each other in a way that normal courtship never would have allowed. "What are you thinking?" Ben asked, his hand stroking her hair gently. "That I would walk barefoot through the snow 1,000 times if it meant finding you," Penelope said honestly. Ben pulled her closer. "I am the lucky one. You could have chosen safety and comfort with James Garrett. Instead, you chose a struggling rancher and a hard life." "I chose love," Penelope corrected. "Everything else is just details." Life on the ranch was indeed hard, as everyone had warned. Penelope continued teaching through the spring and into the next school year, riding into town each morning and returning each evening. Ben worked from dawn until dusk, expanding his herd, improving his pastures, making endless repairs and upgrades. But they were happy. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. On Sundays, they attended church and shared meals with friends in town. Penelope joined Ben for ranch work when she could, learning to ride well enough to help move cattle, to tend the vegetable garden she planted, to preserve food for the winter. The town eventually accepted them as a couple, even celebrating them. Penelope was a good teacher, and that earned respect. Ben was known as an honest, hard-working man, and his ranch was prospering. Together, they were building something solid. In the winter of 1879, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Ben on a snowy evening much like the one when they had first sheltered together in the line shack. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy, excitement, and a touching nervousness about becoming a father. "What if I am no good at it?" he worried, pacing the small house. "What if I end up like my father, hard and bitter?" "Impossible," Penelope said firmly. "You are nothing like him, Ben. You are patient and kind and loving. You will be an excellent father." Their son was born in August, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him William after Penelope's father and called him Will. Ben was utterly smitten, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes. Penelope took a break from teaching that year, staying home with Will while Ben ran the ranch. It was a different kind of hard than she had expected, the endless cycle of feeding and changing and soothing, the exhaustion that came with caring for an infant. But it was also filled with joy, watching Will grow and change, seeing Ben's gentle patience as he learned to be a father. When Will was a year old, Penelope returned to teaching part-time, and Ben hired his first ranch hand, a young man named Charlie who proved to be a hard worker and became a good friend. The ranch continued to grow, and so did their family. A daughter, Catherine, arrived 2 years after Will, named for Ben's favorite sister. She had her mother's dark hair and a sunny disposition that brought light to even the hardest days. The years passed in a blur of work and love, challenges and triumphs. Droughts came and tested their resilience. Good years allowed them to expand. They added rooms to the house, making it into a proper home. Ben built a schoolhouse on the ranch property so the children could be educated even when weather made the trip to town impossible. Penelope taught not just her own children, but also the children of neighboring ranchers, creating a small school that served the whole community. On their 10th anniversary, Ben took Penelope back to the line shack where they had first sheltered together. It was still standing, maintained by ranchers who knew its value as an emergency shelter. They brought blankets and food, spending the night there like they had all those years ago. "You ever regret it?" Ben asked as they lay by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms. "Choosing this life instead of something easier?" Penelope thought about the question seriously. She thought about the hard work, the years of struggle, the times when money was tight and worry kept her awake at night. She thought about the comforts she had given up, the city amenities she would never have again, the society and culture of Philadelphia that sometimes seemed like a dream from another life. Then she thought about Ben, about the way he still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She thought about Will and Catherine, growing strong and smart on the prairie. She thought about the community they had built, the students she had taught, the life they had created together from nothing but determination and love. "Not even for a moment," she said honestly. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." Ben kissed her forehead, and they fell asleep to the sound of prairie wind, just as they had on that fateful night 10 years before. More years passed. Will grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Catherine proved to have her mother's mind and her father's determination, determined to become a teacher like Penelope. 2 more children arrived. Thomas, who was born during a terrible blizzard and earned the nickname Storm, and finally little Anna, a surprise blessing when Penelope was 42 and thought her childbearing years were over. The ranch prospered beyond Ben's wildest dreams. He expanded to 1,000 acres, built a proper ranch house to replace the original cabin, which they kept as a guest house full of memories. He bred horses as well as cattle and gained a reputation for quality stock. Charlie became his foreman, and they hired a crew of hands to manage the large operation. Penelope eventually stopped teaching school to focus on the ranch and the children, but she never stopped educating. She started a lending library in Caldwell, donated books from her own collection, and solicited donations from back east. She organized lecture series and cultural events, bringing a touch of refinement to the frontier town. She taught her children and grandchildren not just reading and arithmetic, but the value of knowledge, the importance of compassion, the necessity of working hard for what you believed in. James Garrett eventually remarried, a widow from Wichita who brought her own children into his family. He and Ben developed a friendship based on mutual respect, often working together on town business and territorial politics. Tommy and Sarah Garrett remained close with the Prestons, and eventually, Tommy married a friend of Catherine's, joining the families in a different way. Caldwell grew from a rough cattle town into a proper city, with schools and churches, businesses and culture. The wild frontier gradually became tamed, though the prairie remained vast and beautiful, still capable of inspiring awe in those who loved it. On their 30th anniversary, Ben presented Penelope with a gift, a painting he had commissioned from an artist in Kansas City. It showed a man on horseback reaching down to help a woman walking in the snow, her feet bare, his boots already given to her. In the background, barely visible through the swirling white, was the line shack where they had sheltered. "So we never forget," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. "So we always remember that the best things in life come from the moments when we choose to help someone in need, when we give without thought of return, when we trust our hearts even when logic says otherwise." Penelope cried when she saw it, remembering that girl in the snow who had thought her life was over, not knowing she was about to find everything she had ever wanted. She looked at Ben, now silver-haired and weathered by decades of prairie sun, and saw the same man who had given her his boots without hesitation, the same man who had cared for her frozen feet with gentle hands, the same man who had loved her unconditionally for 30 years. "I would do it all again," she said, taking his hand. "Every single moment exactly as it happened, because it led me here to you, to this life we built together." They hung the painting in their parlor where it remained for the rest of their lives, a reminder and a legacy. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, how a tragedy became a blessing, how a cowboy gave a freezing woman his boots and ended up giving her his heart. Will took over the ranch when Ben was ready to step back, proving to be as capable as his father. Catherine became a teacher as she had always dreamed, running the school in Caldwell for nearly 40 years. Storm followed his own path, becoming a veterinarian and returning to serve the ranching community. Anna married a lawyer and moved to Topeka, but returned home often, always saying nothing compared to the beauty of the prairie. Ben and Penelope aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They remained active in the community, mentoring young couples, supporting charitable causes, living examples of what a true partnership could be. They had weathered every storm together, celebrated every triumph together, and built a legacy that extended far beyond their ranch boundaries. When Ben passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 78, Penelope grieved deeply but without regret. They had been married 45 years, and not one of those years had been wasted. She kept the ranch running with Will's help, determined to honor the life Ben had built. She lived another 6 years, long enough to see grandchildren married and great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that the legacy she and Ben had created would continue for generations. She spent her final days in the house Ben had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren, her mind clear and her heart at peace. On a winter evening much like the one when Ben had found her in the snow, Penelope Harrington Preston closed her eyes for the last time. According to the grandchildren who were with her, her last words were, "I see him. He is waiting for me, and he has his boots." They buried her next to Ben on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as vast and beautiful as the love they had shared. The entire town of Caldwell turned out for the funeral, paying respects to a woman who had shaped their community, taught their children, and lived her life with grace and courage. Years later, their great-grandson discovered the original boots in a trunk in the old cabin, carefully preserved and wrapped in tissue paper. With them was a letter in Penelope's handwriting, addressed to future generations. The letter told the full story of that December day when she had been walking barefoot in the snow, when a cowboy had given her his boots and changed both their lives forever. She wrote about the importance of kindness to strangers, about choosing love over security, about building a life based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. "We were two lost souls," she wrote, "who found each other in the middle of nowhere and created something beautiful from nothing but determination and love. We faced hardships that would have broken weaker people, but we faced them together, and that made all the difference." If you are reading this, you are part of our legacy. Remember that the best things in life are not possessions or status, but the connections we forge with other people. Remember to give without expectation of return. Remember to choose love, even when it is not the logical choice. Remember that home is not a place, but the people who fill your heart. And remember that sometimes, the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. The boots and the letter were eventually donated to the Historical Museum in Caldwell, where they remain on display to this day. The painting hangs in the ranch house, which is still owned and operated by Preston descendants. The story of Penelope and Ben has been passed down through generations, a tale of love and sacrifice that continues to inspire. The ranch itself stands as testament to what two people can build when they work together toward a common dream. The original cabin, where Penelope and Ben spent their first years together, has been preserved as a historical landmark. The house Ben expanded and improved over the years is still lived in, still filled with the love and laughter of family. Visitors to Caldwell can take a tour that includes all the significant locations from the Preston story. The site where Ben found Penelope in the snow, marked now with a simple stone monument. The lined shack where they first sheltered, maintained by the local historical society. The school where Penelope taught for so many years. The church where they were married. The ranch they built together. Local historians say the Preston story represents the best of the frontier spirit, resilience, generosity, and the courage to follow your heart. It is a story about two people who refused to let circumstances define them, who chose to build rather than accept, who found love in the most unlikely place and held onto it through every challenge. But perhaps most importantly, it is a story about a single moment of decision. Ben could have ridden past that figure in the snow, concerned only with his own safety. Penelope could have chosen security over passion, accepting James Garrett's practical offer instead of trusting her heart. Either decision would have been understandable, even sensible. Instead, they chose differently. Ben chose compassion over caution. Penelope chose love over logic. And from those choices, they built a life that touched hundreds of other lives, that created a legacy lasting generations, that proved love could not only survive but thrive in even the harshest conditions. The boots that Ben gave Penelope that day in the snow became a symbol of more than just a generous act. They represented the willingness to sacrifice for another person, to give what you need in order to help someone who needs it more. They represented the moment when two paths crossed and then merged, creating something stronger than either path alone could have been. Every year on the anniversary of the day Ben found Penelope, the Preston family gathers at the ranch for a celebration. They read from Penelope's letter, they share stories of their ancestors, and they remember that their family began with an act of kindness on a bitter winter day. The youngest children listen wide-eyed to the tale of great-great-grandmother walking in the snow and great-great-grandfather giving her his boots. And every year the story ends the same way, with the words that have become the family motto, the principle that guides each generation. Give without hesitation, love without reservation, build without limitation. These were the values Penelope and Ben lived by, the values that made their love story more than just a romance, but a foundation for generations of strong, compassionate, determined people. The prairie still stretches vast and beautiful around Caldwell, Kansas. The wind still whispers through the grass, carrying stories of the past. And somewhere in that landscape, in the house on the hill, in the boots preserved behind museum glass, in the painting that captured a moment of salvation, the love story of Penelope and Ben continues to live, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the moments when we extend our hand to help a stranger, when we give our boots to someone walking barefoot in the snow, when we offer our heart without knowing if it will be accepted. Their story reminds us that love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about showing up when someone needs you. It is about choosing kindness when you could choose indifference. It is about building something together, day by day, year by year, through joy and sorrow, prosperity and hardship. It is about two people deciding that together they are stronger than apart, and then proving it through a lifetime of partnership. Penelope Harrington came to Kansas seeking a new life and found a great love. Benjamin Preston gave a stranger his boots and gained a partner who would stand beside him through everything life could throw at them. Together, they created a legacy that outlasted their lifetimes, a story that continues to inspire, a love that proved itself capable of surviving and thriving in the wild, beautiful, sometimes brutal frontier. And it all began with a woman walking barefoot in the snow, and a cowboy who gave her his boots and his heart.